Makes it hard to
Even
talk.
when we talk.
No, you know, we've done it both ways.
Whatever.
Yes.
Chairman, you may proceed.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to call to order this virtual meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission today, October 8th, 2021 at 2 p.m. At this point, I'll call the roll.
Mike, it's hard to hear you, at least on my side.
Okay, is that any better?
It's a little better.
Let me see. Let's see if IT can help me here. All right, let me start over. And again, Rachel, tell me if you can hear me or not. I'd like to call to order this virtual meeting of the Rehoboth Beach Planning Commission on October 8th, 2021 at 2 p.m. I will call the roll as follows. Barry Covington.
Here.
Jim Ellison.
Here.
Mike Strange.
Here.
Rachel Macha.
Here.
Steve Kaufman.
Here.
Julie Davis.
Here.
Nan Hunter. Nan is not with us.
She was.
Okay, maybe she's just running late.
She's online. She just does not have her camera on.
Okay, Nan Hunter, there you are. Are you with us, Nan? I think she's muted. Okay, Nan Hunter?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, John Dewey?
Here.
All right, we have a quorum, and this meeting is now called to order. First thing is the verification of the meeting notice by Secretary Womack, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, the agenda for the Planning Commission regular meeting was posted in City Hall and on the city portal on October 1st, 2021, and was sent out from the portal on the same day. The agenda was amended on October 5th and October 7th and was reposted on those same days. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have has everyone had an opportunity to review the minutes of August 13, 2021? I'd like a motion to approve or revise as needed.
So moved.
Have a motion by Ms. Davis. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Ellison? All those in favor of the minutes as drafted?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, the minutes are approved. As far, Ms. Womack, as far as correspondence, we did have some correspondence, I believe, maybe yesterday on the Belhaven project. Is that correct?
Yes, we did. We received correspondence from Dr. Terrace
All right.
regarding the Belhaven Hotel project.
Okay. First matter on the agenda under old business is the continued discussion and recommendation of the Board of Commissioners regarding a change of zone request for 330 Rehoboth Avenue. I'd like to remind everyone that the Planning Commission's role here is to make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners. The Board of Commissioners will make the final decision. Do we have any staff reports on the status of 330 Rehoboth rezoning at this time?
Planning Commission staff report is available, and I can give a summary of it.
Would you please, sir?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just barely.
So I'll just go through the process. This is a zoning amendment request. As was mentioned, the Planning Commission would make a recommendation to the board on the application. There would be a public hearing, and then the board would consider it before taking action. So the request is to rezone a portion of a parcel at the southeast corner of Rehoboth Avenue and State Road from R1 residential to C1 commercial. The staff review was in the packet. It's in the city's website. It's under the the September meeting, the original meeting, and the Planning Commission have had that for a while to review it. So I'm just giving a summary overview of it. With a zoning amendment review, usually the evaluations include looking at the comprehensive development plan policies and the areas adjacent to the property for consistency with the proposed rezoning. Looking at the areas adjacent usually for the uses and intensity. And you can see in the letter that there's a zoning map and analysis of the land uses adjacent to the subject property. The other thing to point out, and it's been mentioned at the previous meetings, is that although there is a concept plan that was reviewed and it's been submitted, that a review by the Planning Commission on a zoning change has to consider all potential C1 uses, not the concept plan, and cannot, as was discussed at length, I believe at the June meeting, that it's not appropriate through the process to apply conditions to a zoning request. But there are other considerations. So just, if you're looking at the letter, the evaluation with the comprehensive development plan is that the rezoning addresses some of the policies, primarily the ones promoting revitalization in certain areas of the city, along Rehoboth Avenue or some of the gateway locations. But that part of the analysis is that it's also to protect, the policies are to protect if development or redevelopment's happening, to protect the most valuable assets in the city, as mentioned in the plan, are the existing residential neighborhoods. And there's a couple of policies in the letter, excerpts that highlight that, that policy for people who are looking at it. The letter also looks at the areas adjacent, and I'm going to focus on the portion of the property that's R1. So the areas around that are primarily existing residential areas to the south and east and west. So that rezoning without safeguards could be, if C1 were to be a permitted use there, if there were no other safeguards in place, the uses that are permitted under C1 could create conflicts with the adjacent residential areas. So we don't know exactly how to reconcile that at this point. We'll be talking about that, but that's something to raise as part of the evaluation. The letter also says in the recommendation, let me pull that up. So at the end of recommendation says, since a change from the R1 to the C1 district would provide the opportunity to develop that portion of the site with higher intensity uses and structures by right, wouldn't be advisable to change the current zoning without, one, or A, revising the comprehensive development plan policies to reflect policy refinements. And that would be required with state law. If you do change the zoning, Delaware requires, if it were to be inconsistent, to change the comprehensive plan as well. Or obtaining assurances that goals to maintain adjacent residential neighborhood integrity could be achieved. Since this staff review was done, the city received further documents from the applicant. One was a document describing restrictive covenants, and the other was a revised concept plan. So everybody's had a chance to look at those documents, and I'm sure there'll be discussion about them, but just for people who are listening, some of the points or takeaways that I did when I reviewed it was, it describes the affected parties and scope of the proposed restrictive covenants. The term would be 30 years. It describes the set of current commercial or C1 uses that would be restricted, during that 30-year period. It states certain building and lot restrictions. One is that the rear yard setback would be 10 feet as opposed to 5 feet if it's adjacent to a residential area. It states at-grade parking is on the area currently R1. I think it's just describing that it's there. It also mentions that the owner retains the right to repair, remodel, redevelop, expand on the property. So I'm just giving an overview of that document, and I'm sure we'll be discussing it. The second document shows a hotel complex concept plan. Again, the planning review is not going to focus on that, but the one thing that's of interest is that when this was submitted, compared to the one that was reviewed in June, the structure is different. The footprint of the structure is further down State Road into what is the current property that's zoned R1. So again, I'm hesitant to review the concept plan in much detail, but since the discussions are about how, if it were to be rezoned to C1, what would be the safeguards for R1, and that's something for the Planning Commission to consider in your evaluation. So that's just an overview of the staff review. I'm welcome to take questions now or further down the road.
Does anyone have any? Mr. Ellison?
Yeah, Tom, in your piece, you also talk about the possibility of a plus review. Did that happen?
Thank you for reminding me. No, as far as I know, it hasn't happened yet, but it's just noted in the staff review because I believe this proposed square footage is over 70,000 square feet, which is above the benchmark. So at some point, the applicants need to submit for a plus review under state law.
So that becomes a requirement above 71,000.
It's actually above 50,000, I believe.
50, I see. Thank you.
Anyone else? Comments, please. All right, hearing none. Does the applicant wish to speak? Mr. Hutt, are you online? Mr. Savage, Carlton Savage.
Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I think I was muted before. For the record, my name is David Hutt, and I'm the attorney. I'm a law firm with the law firm of Marsh James, representing the applicant 330 Hospitality Group. I believe most of the Planning Commission, or at least the ones that were members previously, will recognize this application. And I'm trying to get my camera to work.
It is now.
Okay.
We can see you now, Mr. Hutt.
Thank you. And sitting in the room with me at the last several virtual meetings, to my right, your left is Don Lockwood, and to my left and your right is Betty Gallo, and these are principals of the entities that own 330 Hospitality Group. The last time, as was just indicated when Mr. West spoke, the last time that this application was in front of the commission was in June. And since that time, several things have occurred. First, there are a couple of new commission members, so welcome from these applicants. And the other two items that have occurred is between June and now, the city hired a planner. And of course, you have his report in your package of materials. And he provided his analysis and information up to the original amounts. And then this afternoon, and then of course, subsequently, he provided some analysis on the restrictive covenant and the revised concept plan. And then that's the third item that has occurred is, of course, is that on behalf of the applicant, I proffered a formal restrictive covenant for this property, which, as I indicated a moment ago, is part of the packet before the commission this afternoon. Before discussing those last two items, being Mr. West's report and the restrictive covenant that is being proffered, I wanted to go back to the original goal of this process. The goal of this process is to revitalize this property at the gateway to Rehoboth there as you come in, whether you come in on State Road or Rehoboth Avenue. And I think most everyone would agree that this is a property for which revitalization is sorely needed. In considering how best to accomplish that revitalization, the applicant met originally with members of the building office, members of the mayor's office, and city solicitor, and talked through various options, and then actually met with the planning commission, which had some different members, of course, than it presently does. But through those meetings that began in 2019, it was determined that the best path forward for this was to seek one homogeneous zoning classification for the entirety of the property, instead of seeking a series of variances to try to put together a package of variances that would apply to a future project on the site. And I think it's been discussed at almost every one of the meetings that I've been to in front of the Planning Commission from that time forward. But sound land use planning seeks to avoid split zoning of properties just as a general rule. And that is because split zoning creates questions about how to apply and enforce the building code and the zoning code, both as to uses of a property as well as compliance with things like bulk area requirements. Of course, the request to rezone this property would resolve those questions and conflicts and would leave the property with one zoning classification, the commercial zoning classification that it currently enjoys along Rehoboth Avenue, and would allow building and zoning codes to be applied that are as they are set forth in your code. And of course, that's what Mr. Janis and his department would do, as well as your plan reviewer would be able to apply those. And as was just indicated when Mr. West spoke, in addition, of course, ultimately there would be a site plan review that would be conducted in front of this body, the Planning Commission. With that underlying goal of creating one uniform zoning classification across the property, I wanted to turn to Mr. West's report, and I think he may have read both sections that I had highlighted and we're going to read, but I was going to I'll reiterate them quickly here. And the first is at the bottom of page 2, I'm sorry, the very bottom of the second to last page of his report, which provides a good summary of, I think, the competing concepts that have been discussed in front of the Planning Commission at the several meetings. And in the report, it states that based on this cursory review of the current CDP policies, a change to C1 could be consistent with policies promoting revitalization in corridor and gateway areas, but could exacerbate concerns related to impacts to adjacent residential areas. When you turn to the next page of Mr. West's report, that is the recommendation section of his report. And he read in a moment ago, so I will not reread it, but he read in a moment ago sort of what I'll call the conclusion of his report, which talked about the fact that a change from R1 to C1 would provide the opportunity for higher intensity uses. And of course, that flows naturally that when you rezone something from residential to commercial, the commercial zoning code allows for more intense uses than a residential zoning classification does. The conclusion, though, that, or recommendation rather, that Mr. West's report makes has two options by which a change of zone could occur. And the first of those, or A in the report, is revising the CDP policies to reflect policy refinements. And the second, or B, was or obtain assurances that goals to maintain adjacent residential neighborhood integrity could be achieved. And I think that's part of the discussion that we've been going through in the last couple of meetings that me and the applicants have attended. And in those presentations and discussions, they have focused on trying to get to what ultimately turned out to be option B in Mr. West's recommendation, which was looking for ways to help maintain the adjacent residential neighborhoods that are behind and beside this site. And as you likely recall, at the last meeting, there was a sort of an informal, just what I'll call a bare bones idea or some simple language regarding a possibility for a restrictive covenant. And of course, what has been submitted since then is an actual document that could be recorded, signed and recorded with the recorder of deeds to become a restrictive covenant to run with the land. I wanted to quickly review that. Mr. West did a good job of reviewing it, and I wanted to highlight a few of those things myself. The restrictive covenant begins by describing and identifying who the benefited parties are to the restrictive covenant. And the description, I think, takes a little more than a page, but the description includes the city of Rehoboth Beach itself, and then all of the property owners who are who have boundaries that touch or are adjacent to this property. So that starts on Rehoboth Avenue, goes beside the property, goes behind the property, and calls out each of the units in the two buildings that back up to this property, and then continues on around to the other side and identifies each of those properties as being a benefited party to this restrictive covenant. And the significance of being a benefited party is that the restrictive covenant, as it's been prepared, says that it cannot be modified without the approval of both the city and 2/3 of those benefited parties. So if in the future somebody wanted to do something that is prohibited within that restrictive covenant, or move parking or change that rear yard setback, they would need to come back to the city, and at the same time, they would also need 2/3 approval from those benefited parties, all of the properties that touch the applicant's property. And with respect to the restrictive covenants themselves, there are 3 primary restrictions, and as Mr. West indicated, the proposal is for those to have a term of 30 years. The first identifies certain uses that the C1 zoning district permits as a matter of right, and it identifies those as being prohibited rather than permitted. And I think it's important to point out that they're prohibited not just on the R1, the present R1 portion of the property, but they would be prohibited, of course, across the entirety of the property. So something that's a permitted use now on the portion of the property along Rehoboth Avenue would be prohibited along the newly rezoned area to C1, as well as the existing C1 area. The second restrictive covenant is that parking on the property shall stay where it is. And this is a reflection of the history of the operation or the property. As everyone knows, whether it was the horse and buggy or the seahorse or Chili Billy's or any of the other uses that have occurred over the last half century or more, what I'll call the business operations of the property have been conducted along Rehoboth Avenue, and the parking for those business operations has been located along State Road. And the proposal in that restrictive covenant keeps that arrangement generally the same. The geographic boundaries of those may change slightly, as was indicated when Mr. West spoke a moment ago, but any at-grade parking on the site would stay where it presently is in that section of the property. The third restrictive covenant is that the rear yard setback or separation that the code requires when you have commercial and residential uses that abut each other, the code requires a 5-foot distance there. And what is proposed in the restrictive covenant is that the rear yard, that separation or setback, be doubled from 5 feet to 10 feet. This proposed restrictive covenant is intended to accomplish option B that's set forth in Mr. West's report. And it does that in 2 primary ways. First, it provides greater separation between residential and commercial uses than exists today. Certainly the current structure of the property, the old restaurant and office space, that is not 10 feet off of the boundary line in the rear. And so it would provide greater or enhanced separation there. And in addition to that, the second way that this achieves option B in Mr. West's report is that the usage of the property stays very similar to what it has been for more than half a century. And that's what we were just speaking about a moment ago, with the commercial activities occurring on the Rehoboth Avenue portion of the property, just as they have for these many decades, and then the parking staying in approximately the same location where it is now along State Road. And I know and understand that the Planning Commission has concerns, and in any change of zone application, there are always concerns about the list of permitted uses in the underlying zoning classification. In addition to the restrictive covenant, which I just reviewed, I would like to ask one of the applicants, Betty Gallo, to speak to the commission for just a few minutes about her vision of this property and goal of the property, as she has been a longtime resident of the Rehoboth Beach community. So I'm going to ask her to make a few comments, and then I will conclude, and we'll be ready for any questions that members of the commission may have. Ms. Gallo?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. I know some of you know who we are, some don't, but myself, my husband, and most of my family have lived here for about 47 years. Been in business in the area for over 40 years. And when this property came available, we felt that, and we also have been in the hotel business, and we thought this was a perfect property for a nice hotel there, enhancement to Rehoboth. There's nothing else that we really, this was the main reason that we bought the property and thought it would be a good addition to and as I said, we live here and we're not going to put anything there that would be detrimental to the people around us or to the city. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
That concludes our presentation, and as Ms. Gallo just indicated, we'd be happy to answer any questions that members of the commission may have.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
I have two questions, both of which relate to the proposed restrictive covenants. The first is that the covenants would provide that any on-site at-grade parking would remain on the R1 lot. But paragraph 5.3 of the proposed covenants would allow the property owner to expand and enlarge the commercial uses across the entire property as I read it. What would prevent the owners from either undergrounding all property and expanding, whether it's a hotel or other commercial uses, across the entire R1 property, because that would then be a commercially zoned, and or building above surface parking, a multi-story addition, whether it was additional hotel rooms or whatever, across the entire what's now R1 property?
Mr. Hudd, I think that's directed to you, sir.
Sure. What prevents that from happening is the bulk area requirements within the code. There are, as you know, there are floor area ratio limitations, lot coverage limitations. All of those limitations would prevent that from happening. And just so the current plan itself actually has underground parking in the existing C1 portion of the property, as well as the R1 portion of the property. So there would be both at grade and below grade parking on what is currently the R1 portion, as well as the area that you drive under. A portion of that is on the R1 portion in that revised conceptual plan. And so I think that the FAR and the other bulk area requirements are what would prevent that from happening. And if there is additional language that the city would want to see to be more clear that is what is proposed and intended, certainly would be happy to consider that.
But it's your position that any extension of whether it's hotel rooms or other commercial uses over the entire 19,000 square foot R1 lot would be prohibited or barred by the provisions of the zoning code?
No, I don't think that they are expressly prohibited. I think what I'm saying is that they are functionally prohibited when the bulk area requirements of the code are applied. And the other part of this, maybe to help clarify this as I'm trying to speak through it, is that what we're saying is we wouldn't put what that provision says is we wouldn't slide the hotel down so it goes all the way along. Its frontage is just along State Road, and the parking begins on Rehoboth Avenue. You're basically flipping the historical use of the site. What's the intent of that language was to keep it as it currently is and has been for half a century, with parking oriented along State Road and the business operations located along Rehoboth Avenue.
Well, we're not going to take the time to debate this now, but I don't think that the terms of the restrictive covenant as currently proposed accomplish what you say your intent is. I just have one more quick question. One aspect of the restrictive covenants that has not been mentioned so far is the provision that states that if legal action were initiated, presumably by the neighbors, to enforce the covenants, the losing party would pay all the costs of enforcement, including attorney's fees. That is a pretty heavy lift for an adjacent residential neighborhood of single-family homes. The prospect of being charged with all the litigation costs of both sides, particularly the costs of a large commercial operator who could afford to hire, the most expensive attorneys and consultants and architects and so forth in a prolonged court case. I would think that would be very little comfort to the surrounding residential community, but I leave that to you to deal with because it's your proposal.
Members of the commission, if I may interrupt for 1 minute. I believe John Dewey is neither participating or making any vote or taking any action on this matter. I just wanted to make that clear for the record. Mr. Kaufman. You're muted, Steve.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, sir.
First, I want to welcome the two new commissioners to the Planning Commission, which we didn't do right at the beginning. I share some of the concerns that Commissioner Davis shares. I am not a fan of split zoning. I think that it's much better for property to be unified in its zoning in terms of its uses and also the reviews. And I am happy to see that there's some effort to place a restrictive covenant as to what would not permit it here. My problem is that it doesn't go far enough, as I think Ms. Davis was indicating. There really needs to be part of this restrictive covenant or a separate enforceable proffer as to what uses will be put on this property with what limitations. I don't have a problem with a hotel, and there's probably some other uses that I and other members of the Planning Commission would not have a problem with. But it really needs to state affirmatively what is intended. I appreciate the owner's comments, and I believe that she's very sincere in those. However, this property could be sold to a third party who might not share those sentiments. And so I think what we need here is a better covenant, a set of covenants. And until we see that, I don't know how I could recommend approval of rezoning. With those changes, I think I probably would recommend rezoning. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes.
Hey, may I ask a question, Chairman?
Certainly. Yes, sir. Hello?
I'm here.
Hi, Mr. Chairman. Can the applicant ask a question of Mr. Kaufman?
Yes, sir.
We can't hear you, Michael.
Yes, sir, Mr. Hutt.
Mr. Kaufman, we're happy to consider additional language for this. Do you think it would be a useful exercise to go through the permitted uses in the C1 district and identify which of those items are deemed to be more appropriate, or what you would want to see in the covenant, so that if there's going to be a redraft of this, we can hopefully get on the same page as quickly as possible?
Yeah, I think that is an appropriate approach. I don't know where Ms. Davis is, but I would prefer to see a proffer that says what you're going to do and what you're going to limit. And what you put down so far is a good beginning, but it's just not enough. I think the city and the adjacent property owners need reassurance that it will be exactly what you're saying. So I think that a modification of the covenants that does that, and I'm not saying you need to limit it just to a hotel. There are probably others, a condominium and other things that probably would be appropriate with sufficient safeguards.
Within Mr. West's report, he has cut and pasted the permitted uses, the chart that shows the permitted uses. The applicant would be happy to walk through those and learn the Planning Commission's position on those.
I don't know that we have time for all of that today. We have a lot on our agenda, but I wouldn't mind having you submit a proposal to us through our planner as to what those permitted uses would be. And, we might have to defer to another time, and maybe some of the other planning commissioners think differently, but I think we need something further. And I don't know that we have time to do all that today.
Mr. Hutt, this is Mike Bryan, Chair. I don't think it's appropriate for the Planning Commission to negotiate this in a public setting like this. We have other matters coming before us on the agenda that deserve our attention as well. And I think this is something that might best be left between you and council for the Planning Commission. And then once submitted, the Planning Commissioners can review and we can discuss at the next meeting or the meeting, whichever meeting you want. Before I leave this topic, though, could I please ask one question? Your section 6 on building restrictions says that at-grade parking shall be located in the area on the property along State Road. It does not, however, say that that's the only use for that area. And when I look at the exhibit that Mr. West referenced, it does appear, and would you confirm that the proposed hotel building does encroach further upon the R1 zoned parcel than was originally set forth in an exhibit given some months ago to this commission?
Yes, as I said earlier, it does. There's the sort of the entranceway that you drive through, and that was done frankly, at the request of the Planning Commission to spread the impact of the building and also to allow for the greater rear boundary and separation with the adjacent residential neighbors. So yes, the building does, that's the plan that you saw, very similar, I think, or almost identical to the plan that you were looking at in June. But that, to be clear, that is different than the plan the concept from 2019. So that is correct.
Any other members of the commission have any questions for the applicant? Mr. Strange.
Yes, before I have a question to the applicant, I'd like to ask a question of Glenn, since I'm the only commissioner who was here on the commission when this originally came up. And as Mr. Hutt pointed out, the commission, we did recommend at that time as to the course of action. However, I should also recommend, which I assume everyone's aware of, at the time it was brought to us at that time, there was some question as to who owned the property and there was an ensuing lawsuit, and so we did not move forward. I'd like to ask a question of Glenn as a practical matter. We're asked to make a recommendation to the commissioners for the use of this land and the rezoning of it. But But at the same time, we're being asked by Mr. Hutt on behalf of the current owners to declare our intentions with regard to their application. And it seems, don't they have to be done as independent events, and we need to make our decision as to whether a rezoning should occur as completely independent of anything that is currently not before us?
It's a good question and a valid one. And it's a classic example of what happens in almost every single proposed change of zone.
Can you speak up, please, Glenn?
Sure. So I'm saying it's a classic example of what happens pretty much in every circumstance where a change of zone is requested. The municipality always wants to know, well, if we do rezone it, what are we going to get? The applicant, presumably wants to expose as much of that as they can in order to entice the jurisdiction to grant the rezoning. So it's a classic example. I agree with you, Mr. Strange, that in a perfect vacuum, you would look at the character of the neighborhood and all those surrounding things and just ask yourself, does the zoning being requested make sense in this area of the municipality? What's happening here is there's certain proffers being made. It would be wholly inappropriate for the Planning Commission to say, we will grant you a rezoning if you do A, B, and C. That's basically a conditioned change of zone, which is not permitted. It is permitted for an applicant to make certain proffers in order to give some level of comfort to the Planning Commission that when the site plan comes in, which would be the next step of this process, it'll actually have something that is in the zone of acceptable uses for that property. So proffers are something that have developed over time, and it occurs in many of these changes of zone. But as the chairperson said, probably not appropriate for the Planning Commission to be saying this use would be fine, that use would not be fine. It needs to come from the applicant as a proffer that the Planning Commission can then evaluate.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. In that case, Chairman Bryan, I do have a few general observations. Is that appropriate, or are you only entertaining questions directly for Mr. Hutt?
I'd like to just finish this segment of it, if we could, the questions for Mr. Hutt, and then we'll have our commissioners' discussion.
Okay, well, I do have two questions, and specifically with regard to the proposed declaration, and I think there's some logical inconsistencies here. On page 4, where it talks about under 5.1 use of property, and it talks about a billiard pool or other bowling establishments, and then it puts the at the bottom that a pool may be an ancillary or other permitted location in a C1. I think in the context of that sentence, it's strictly relating to what billiards, or a form of that, the American form, which is pool, and not that of a swimming pool. But in any event, also E, with regard to a hand laundry or dry cleaning where cleaning is not done on the premises. So therefore, in theory, if you had a cleaning establishment that had chemical processing equipment, it would be permitted. And I don't think that's really the intent or what should be done. So I would ask what the real intent is.
Mr. Hutt?
The answer to that is that those were cut and pasted from the zoning code.
Right.
So I was not trying to rewrite the zoning code. And so I don't think I would argue with you that there's some logical inconsistencies there, but that just tracks the zoning code. And the purpose of tracking the zoning code was to make clear so that the prohibited uses would align with the verbiage in the zoning code, so that we don't create something where we're trying to describe something in this restrictive covenant that somebody says, well, I don't know if that's this part of the zoning code or this part of the zoning code. If the language is the same, you know that it's that. So that's what that was. And the footnote on the word pool was out of an abundance of caution. I would think that I would agree with your analysis, but that was out of an abundance of caution so that we didn't face that issue in the future.
I figured that was the case, but I think that also indicates the necessity, as has been pointed out by other commissioners, the very explicit nature that the covenant has to be with regard to this. And I would submit that as one other consideration in light of the other comments that have been made by other commissioners. And based on Glenn's advice and Mr. Bryant's comments, that's all I'll say at this time on that to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Nan Hunter?
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Hutt. I have a few questions that I just wanted to clarify before we go into our discussion. The first is that as I read the covenants that you've proposed, there is a time limit on the applicability of those covenants of 30 years. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, that's what's proposed. Yes.
Right. And with regard to, I guess my concerns sort of center on issues of the residential character of this neighborhood and the stability of the neighborhood and the reasonable expectations of the residents. And the things that trouble me about the proposal speak a lot to the, in that category, speak a lot to the differences really between a restaurant, even a very large restaurant, such as the one that was there and several that were there, and the parking for that, and the question of the impact of noise and traffic and the intensity of use. So that it seems to me that as I read your proposal, you're proposing roughly 90 rooms. And so I'm going to estimate that if you have full occupancy, you've got, roughly 200 people, give or take. I think that's a conservative estimate. I mean, tell me if that's incorrect. So you've got 200 people, some portion, which it's probably impossible to estimate, but you've got some portion of that group at certain times using a pool, which is an outdoor pool, and is, at least has the potential to create, I think, significant noise issues. And it's on the border, as I understand it, in the current concept, with the residential areas. So that's one concern that I have. Another concern is that I'm not sure that I accept the sort of analogy between the parking spaces that are there now. And I don't know if you have the number of spaces that are there now, but my sort of eyeballing of it is that it's maybe in the category of 30 or 35 parking spaces. And that being, again, roughly tripled. And so the in and out of just the parking associated with the hotel, which presumably would be not all 24 hours, but would probably, occur over a longer period during the typical day than the in and out for a restaurant. That's going to be an issue with regard to the traffic. And my concern here is that the traffic is traffic coming in and leaving on State Road, which, as we all know, is one of the two, major points, or maybe only points, I guess, of vehicular access to the town. And so it seems to me that the impact of traffic is going to be much more significant from the proposal here than would, let's say, another very large restaurant or some other configuration of commercial activity in that commercial zone. So I'm wondering if you have any comments in response to those concerns.
Sure. With respect to the first, that's the pool question that you raised. What's proposed is an indoor pool. And so hopefully that would alleviate and allay the concerns about noise and such. I think the parking question, most of the parking is underground parking. You certainly have the at-grade parking that's there, but most of the parking is underground for the site because it extends all the way up through the Rehoboth Avenue portion of the property. And so the parking, I believe, is resolved because the majority of the parking is underground here, not at the at-grade level.
Right, but am I correct in interpreting the plans that there's only one driveway point of either entering or exiting the property, regardless of where the cars are parked while they're there? They have to they have to both come in and leave via the access point that is on State Road. Is that correct?
That is correct. There's a singular access point along State Road. Yes.
Right.
The same place it had, right, in approximately the same location that it presently exists.
Right. Right. Thank you.
Other commissioners? Rachel Macha.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I'd like to just kind of come back to where Nan was going. I was thinking about your comment, Nan, and honestly, as I think about a hotel versus perhaps another restaurant at this facility or at this location, I would think there would be a lot more turnover from a traffic perspective as it relates to a restaurant per se versus a hotel. And from an access perspective, I think of other hotels we already have in Rehoboth, like Hotel Rehoboth. Look at that as an example, or the Sands, the Belmore. I mean, they all have one access point off of the road that they are on. I actually, from a personal perspective, as I look at this from a project in that location, I would think that this is a much better project for us to support in this location than, anything else like a restaurant. So I don't have a concern about the parking piece or the access side of it. I do think that indoor pool, of course, from a noise perspective, will contain that. And there obviously are city noise ordinances already in place. So I don't have a concern at all around parking or traffic or noise.
Members of the commission, before we move to general comments, does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Hutt or the applicants? Okay, having said that, I'd like to open this up. Ms. Macha, you've led off with commissioner comments. Any others? Mr. Strange.
Yeah, I've got, first I want to thank Tom for his assessment, and it's really nice to have another urban planner that can give us some guidance. And my observation with regard to the rezoning is it's problematic in my opinion. I'd like to explain why. We've all along in the previous meetings that we've had there's been an a priori assumption that the R1 should convert to C2 and that split zoning is bad. We all agree, the literature agrees, the science literature agrees that split zoning is not good. But the a priori assumption that it should convert all to C2 or to C1 versus R1, I think is not necessarily appropriate. The folks who purchased this land knew that there was issues going in. And so that's moral hazard on their part. They knew that. They may or may not get a rezoning, and they might have to deal with the property that they purchased. So they knew that. However, the people who were not a party to it, which are all the people that surround the area in the R1 zone, had no choice in the matter. In the previous historical perspective, even though it was accidentally misused, there was really no conflict that was created for those that lived in the area. Now with the potential for something new that requires a rezoning in that context, it would impact them. And so I think that there's an issue here of the long-term, essentially, trust involved between the city and the residents who purchased their properties under the assumption that a certain historical use was perceived as being okay. And I'm sure many of the residents didn't have the slightest idea whether it was zoned R1 or C1 or anything else. It's just they knew it was always a parking lot for 40 years. And so now we're going into some change. And I think in this particular situation, I mean, everyone knows Ms. Gallo, and she's well known in the community and for all her philanthropic work. But when this was purchased, this land was purchased, they knew going in that it was split zoned and that you may or may not have the ability to construct something of a larger scale that would require a singularly zoned property. And so we have an obligation, which is quite frankly very difficult, to take the incommensurable and make it commensurable, which is, although we do it all the time, it's still exceedingly difficult. And in this particular case, is even more difficult. There's nothing that prevents, as fellow Commissioner Macha pointed out, absolutely nothing that prevents the owners from redeveloping the section of the property that is commercially zoned and doing whatever they want, whether it's a hotel or a restaurant. But they want to do something that's bigger than that involves larger scale. And I don't think it's appropriate to have the residents essentially absorb the cost of something that they have no control over. And the applicants are the ones that will receive the overwhelming amount of the benefit if they do in fact redevelop this property that way. Nothing prevents them from redeveloping on the section that's C1 currently. So I guess my observation would be that it's a very, very difficult task. I do not think it's at all clear that the zoning should be changed. But that's my observation at the moment, and I think I need to hear from my fellow commissioners.
Thank you, Mr. Strange. Members of the commission, Mr. Ellison.
Yeah. Mike, we can't hear you at all, but
I don't know what's going on here.
yeah,
or why.
Can hear you now.
Okay.
I echo what Mike Strange is saying. Again, taking advice from our attorney, I can disregard, the specific use that is being discussed right now, or a restaurant or whatever, a dry cleaning establishment, and just look at the fact that our new planner has identified that it would not be advisable to change the current zoning without certain conditions. We're not at a point where we're up to changing the zoning rules, if you will. But I didn't see much in the restrictive covenants that made all that much sense, or that would give us very much. But I also think that because almost the entire area or periphery of the R1 zone is adjacent to existing residential areas, I just have a very, very difficult time considering anything other than turning down the rezoning request. Thank you.
Other comments, please, from the commissioners. Ms. Davis.
I will be brief and try not to repeat anything that anybody else has said. But I think it's useful to consider this rezoning application in the context of prior rezoning applications in the city. It's my understanding that there have been 3 prior rezoning applications in the city since the year 2000, all 3 of which, and I can give you the specifics, all 3 of which have been from commercial to residential, not residential, excuse me, to commercial. In my view, this is going in the wrong direction. We're trying to get in accordance with the CDP. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Consistent with the CDP, we're trying to protect our residential neighborhoods. The CDP makes quite many statements throughout the 2010 CDP to that effect. I realize that the applicant are relying on the provisions of the CDP that talk in terms of revitalizing Rehoboth Avenue. Rezoning an R1 parking lot on State Road is not revitalizing Rehoboth Avenue. The hotel by itself on the commercial property that it already is there, 23,000 square feet, can revitalize Rehoboth Avenue. Rezoning the parking lot does nothing but give the owners of the property, with all due respect, more hotel rooms. But what's going on in Rehoboth Avenue is there and will continue. And there's, in terms of the CDP, there have been surveys, as you know, done, in which many of the respondents, almost 90%, listed as one of their major concerns protection of residential neighborhoods from the intrusion of commercial development. And I think that's something that needs to be considered. And finally, I guess in looking at this from a more global perspective, I haven't heard anything so far or seen anything that would convince me or even suggest that a perfectly attractive, architecturally attractive, commercially feasible hotel cannot be built and developed on the existing C1 property, which leads me to wonder why we have to even be considering rezoning the parking lot to accommodate that. The proposed covenants do nothing meaningful to limit future development on the R1 property. In fact, the owners have specifically reserved the right to expand, enlarge, and otherwise redevelop that property for no definite reason, no explicit reason so far. And I have a very hard time understanding why it is, just from that perspective, that the owners couldn't build a perfectly and economically feasible, architecturally attractive hotel on that property without intruding into the R1 property.
I believe I saw Ms. Macha. Did you raise your hand as well?
I did. I'm just going to make a few comments here, and I feel like, this is certainly, I'm outnumbered, but, I'm sure that there is an economic model here, Commissioner Davis, that comes into play. I don't know the hotel business, but just from a business background, I am sure that the owners have looked at that model and determined from an economic standpoint that they need, obviously, that parking to become C1, and then therefore they can have the expansion that they need to make that hotel feasible for them so that they can make money on that location. I guess I'm just going to come back to a couple other things that have been said earlier today. At the outset of this, we talked about really stating what the intent is for the use of this property, and I think we should do that. Obviously, we've taken time and used our current zoning to outline what it shouldn't be, but I do agree that we could be more clear on that. So I think that's good guidance for the owners. But the other thing that I would just ask this group to consider is that is a dilapidated property that's been sitting there for many years. I don't see a lot of people coming to us to actually propose a project for this location. And I think the residents in the area have already stated that they would like to see something done there, that they are seeing rodents on the top of that building. The building is dilapidated, the roof is caving in. So I think we should obviously take that into consideration. It is part of the CDP for us to look at revitalization. Revitalization, in my mind, is also progress that makes sense from an economic standpoint for our city. And I think that this does make sense from an economic standpoint. I think it's a huge eyesore. It's been there for many years. And I think if we really don't try to work with the owners here to bring this project to fruition in some form, I think that corner will sit there for many years to come.
Okay, Mr. Kaufman?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything Commissioner Macha just said, everything. My problem is that we need a better covenant. We need a covenant that specifically says what will or won't be done. I very strongly oppose split zoning. It is not a good thing for the city. It's not a good thing for this property. And it should not be a split zone property. And I take the applicants at their word that they'll do something that will benefit the city and the residential community. And although several of the members of the commission were not on the commission at the time this first came up, or the second time it came up, I was, and there were several residential owners who were near or adjacent to this property that supported this use and reflected the comments that Ms. Macha just made. I mean, we need to move forward, not backward. And although the previous rezonings did go from commercial to residential, it doesn't mean that a rezoning from residential to commercial can't be a benefit to the city. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'd like to move forward and find out if there are.
Mike?
Yes. Oh, Mr. Covington, I'm
just-
sorry.
Barry Covington, just a quick moment. I have been quiet so far, but I agree with Ms. Matcha and Mr. Kaufman. And we have to get back to the CDP, and it was mentioned earlier, the CDP does want that area revitalized. So I think this is a great opportunity to accomplish that. And we don't know what the economics are, but to build a smaller hotel there probably is not economically viable. And Mr. Kaufman's absolutely right. There were some members from the Housing Association or Condominium Board that supported the development of a new hotel as long as the existing parking remained the same. So I think it's a great plan, a great idea, and I would love to see a stronger covenant to protect the neighbors. But I think it's just a wonderful opportunity that we should take advantage of.
Thank you, sir. Nan Hunter.
Can't hear you, Nan.
Muted,
You need to
Nan.
unmute.
No, you're still muted, Nan. I think you and I have the same problem.
Yeah, your mute
I
button's
believe
off.
your microphone on your headphones needs to be flipped down so it activates.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, you can now probably hear me. I apologize for that, for that really primitive glitch in terms of tech. Anyway, I just want to say that I think that that I don't think that, although I understand that the parking is in the same physical location now that it would be in this plan, I don't think it's the same for some of the reasons that I pointed out. I think it would create much more intensity and frequency of use, and I think the impact on traffic at this particular point of access to our whole community is very problematic. The second thing I would say is I don't pretend to know what would be a viable commercial enterprise at this particular location, but this may be the only time you hear me say this, but you know, we could just let the market decide. There will be proposals, if this one does not go forward, that will be commercially viable, I'm quite sure, and that would contribute to the revitalization of that location. I share the general concern about revitalization, but what we do continuously is to balance the economic development issues with the quality of life issues. And in my mind, where we stand right now, the quality of life issues in terms of residential quality of life are not, this proposal does not and perhaps cannot fully protect.
Okay, if that concludes the discussion among the commissioners, I'll reach out to those who have signed up. I can't really tell from the sign-up sheet what projects they signed up to speak about. So I'll simply read the names, and if you have signed up to speak to 330 Rehoboth Avenue change of zoning, please come on and give your speech, your opinion. Carlton Savage, Saurabh Srivastava, Jeffrey Trunzo. Okay, turn on. All right, I'll start over. Carlton Savage, Saurabh Srivastava, Jeffrey Trunzo, Hal Dukes, Alexis Gotti, Dr. Michael Trejo, Alex.
Thank you.
Yes, Alex Papajohn, Peter Falat, Susan Frederick, Rick Perry.
Yes, I would like to comment on this.
All right, Mr. Perry,
If
please
I
go
may,
ahead.
Mr. Chairman. I recognize that Commissioner Strange is the only alumni of the Planning Commission when these proposals were first put forth. But I do want to just be sure that all the members currently serving on the Planning Commission have some historical perspective on this. And that is that when the proposed hotel development was first presented to the Planning Commission, shortly after its initial presentation, the current owners of the property came to the Planning Commission seeking a recommendation from the Planning Commission to rezone the R1 property to C1. And I actually was the planning commissioner who at that time objected to moving forward with the consideration of that request by the applicants because I questioned their standing to make such a request because they were not at that time the record owners of the property. And as Mr. Strange pointed out, there was ensuing litigation and everything, but that's been resolved. And so when you suggest that, it's just sort of a moral risk that the current property owners took, I'm not sure that that's fair to the current property owners. There was an adverse use of that R1 property for decades, and the city did nothing about it and allowed it to continue for probably 50 years or more. I don't know exactly how many years. And I analogize this to adverse possession situations. And I think that what the applicants are asking today is for the Planning Commission to recognize the usage that has existed, which was a usage for C1. It has been utilized as a C1 property for all these decades. And I think the city should follow through with the CDP and the revitalization, which is so essential to the future viability of this city. And in prior planning commissions, we were encouraging that the city be flexible in dealing with applicants who were proposing to redevelop and revitalize areas of the city, not make it more difficult on them, but make it easier for them. There obviously are constraints with the current zoning code, which I don't know what has happened to the review of that code and its rewrite. I suspect it's been buried in a hole somewhere, but it is critical that the city complete that task. And in the meantime, the Planning Commission should be looking forward for our community and being flexible and not more restrictive. I don't think that the change in intensity or usage is a valid argument because the usage isn't changing. Yes, there may be a few more cars coming in and out than there are currently, but you can't compare an unutilized building currently to a situation that previously existed when there were a lot of cars coming in and out of there, particularly when that property had restaurants. And so I think that the property owners had a reasonable expectation that once they had standing,
Lost him.
the zoning change.
You disappeared for a second.
Yes, Mr. Perry, would you dropped out there shortly?
Oh,
After the word standing.
well, I think that they had that the current owners had a reasonable expectation that once they had standing to ask for the zoning change, that it was something that the city would view favorably as a part of the revitalization of Rehoboth Avenue in the West End. And so I think it's unfair to say to them, this property has been used the same way for parking all these years, but now that you're going to do something to help revitalize the West End of Rehoboth Avenue, you can't do that. And I have a question, and that is, I'm clearly in favor of restrictive language that protects the residents, and I think we need to do that. But when were those residential units built? I think that they post-date the improper usage of that R1 property. And so they've, have in large part lived with that being used as a commercial C1 property usage. And to suddenly say that you cannot continue that use anymore, I just don't understand, the logic in that. And so I guess that's about all I have to say at this point. But I think it would be a disservice to the city and certainly unfair to the applicants not to recommend changing this from R1 to C1.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Perry. Okay, members of the commission, this matter has certainly been before us for a number of months. I'd like to know what your decision is here, if we're in a position to make a decision to either recommend approval of the change of zone or denial of the change of zone. I point out again that we are simply making a recommendation. This decision will be made ultimately by the Board of Commissioners. So how would you like to proceed at this point? Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really don't think we're in a position to make a recommendation just yet. I know that there's both sides of the coin here on the Planning Commission. And what I'd like to do, I'd like to recommend that we give this applicant an opportunity to deal with the restrictive covenant in a way that might be more acceptable to the commission. I'd rather not have to take a vote on it today because I don't think we are in a position to know everything that we need to know. Just an informal count, I see 4-4. I don't know where the fifth zone will come from. So that's my recommendation, that we defer it and give them that opportunity. I don't know what others think. So.
Well, Mr. Kaufman, is that a motion to defer the matter to a future meeting?
Yes, I'll make that motion, sure.
And I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Mr. Covington is the second to that. And the motion is to defer this application to the next or other future meeting. Can I please have a vote?
May I ask a question?
Oh, yes, Ms. Davis.
Mr. Kaufman, I believe that your motion is predicated on an assumption that the property owners would come back with changes to the current proposed covenants that would address in a meaningful way some of the concerns that have been raised this afternoon. And I think it's only fair to get a reading from Mr. Hutt and the owners to see if that is in fact likely to happen. Because if it's not, then there's no point in prolonging this or pushing it over to the next meeting.
Thank you, Commissioner Davis. I agree with that. I would wonder if Mr. Hutt could give us a response to that.
Mr. Hutt, please.
Certainly, and the answer to that question is yes, we would certainly like the opportunity. It sounded like from the discussion that occurred earlier between myself, Mr. Kaufman, and the chairman, that the process for that would be me being in contact on behalf of the property owner with the city solicitor and the town planner. And I am certainly, as was indicated earlier, if there's other things and ways that we can refine this, then I will work with Mr. Mandalis and Mr. West and get the Planning Commission a revised draft.
Ms. Macha.
I would just like to ask Mr. Hutt, I mean, do you think you can have that for our next meeting, or would you prefer not to put a time frame around that? Because I know we have pushed this topic off a couple of times, so I would just ask for your guidance there when you'd like to come back. Do you know?
The next meeting, yes, I can assure you that it would be that the next meeting. And the good news is within the framework of, hopefully I have a good framework, I hope, of the restrictive covenant. So hopefully through some conversations or emails or whatnot between myself, Mr. Mandalis, and Mr. West, I hope that we can have a revised draft to the commission well in advance of the next meeting and get this to a vote at the next meeting.
Thank you.
When you say the next meeting, the Planning Commission has a special meeting for the CDP discussion in October 22nd, I believe. I think, Mr. Hutt, what you're referring to is the November Planning Commission meeting. Is that correct?
I was referring to the next regular meeting. I mean, certainly if we wanted to try to accelerate that, but now I'm speaking for Mr. Mandalis' schedule and Mr. West's schedule, and I wouldn't presume to do that. So,
Well, I think from the Planning Commission standpoint, it would be the November meeting.
That's what I was thinking.
and that's fine.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Mr. Strange?
Yeah, I just have a question with regard to that submittal, that I assume that it's separate and discrete, the site plan, which ultimately will be presented, that they're not going to be done concurrently as a submittal.
I'm not sure what the status of the site plan is at all. Mr. West?
I don't think you can submit a site plan until you have a zone, so.
Right.
That's
I
correct.
thought that was the guidance we received before.
Yeah.
Are we prepared to vote on the motion to defer?
Yes.
Please see a show of hands in favor of deferring this decision until the November regular meeting. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that correct? I see, let me get this straight. This technology is only so good. Steve Kaufman, Barry Covington, Mr. Ellison, Mr. Strange, Mr. Macha, and
Miss
Macha and Julie Davis are all in favor of that. Is that correct?
Yes.
And those opposed?
I guess
Ms.
I'm alone
Hunter.
on this, but
And the chair votes for deferral as well. So I think it is passed. We're defer this to the November regular meeting of the Planning Commission. Thank you very much. All right, the next matter on the agenda is basically the Planning Commission discussion of schedule of review comments to the comprehensive development plan. If I could simply, I think, highlight where we are, and that is that we have an internal draft for the Planning Commission's view due to come from Wallace Montgomery, our new consultant, on October 11th. We have a special Planning Commission meeting scheduled for October 22nd to review this and discuss it. And then our response is due back to Wallace Montgomery on October 25 of this month. So is there anything else that needs to come up at this point? All right, if not, then we'll move on to the new business, which is a concept review for the Belhaven Hotel Properties, and as set forth on the agenda. Now, please understand, and I know you do, but please be aware that this is a concept review. This is not a site plan review. This is not any of those things. This is a concept review. And the city code is pretty clear about the fact that the Planning Commission and the applicant shall review and discuss any issues or concerns related to the proposed project, and that the Planning Commission shall take no action to approve or deny the concept or any details of a proposed development at the project concept review and discussion. So other than submitting a summary after the fact, we take no vote today, and this is really what I would consider to be a very high-level overview of what the project intends to be. Having said that, Mr. West, I don't believe you have a written report. Do you have kind of an overview report as well?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. As you're alluding to, this is an informal review. It's different than a site plan review. The plan this version originally came in as a site plan review, so a full staff review was initiated. Subsequent to that, the decision was to discuss the initial findings with the applicant, because under the city code, a site plan review cannot proceed for planning commission review unless the building official verifies that it's compliant with the code. The application as submitted is not compliant, and the FAR is over 3, which the maximum is 2. So the meeting with the applicants was to address the initial findings, discuss that with them, get a sense of their approach of how to proceed with the site plan review that was submitted. So we met with the applicants, the building official, myself, city solicitor, and discussed our findings and what their approach would be. The discussions at that meeting were that they were going to proceed with a submittal request with the Board of Adjustment for the FAR review, for a variance on that. They also expressed an interest at the meeting for an additional concept plan review with the Planning Commission. The plan has been revised. There was also discussion about new members on the Planning Commission that while they're proceeding with the application to the Board of Adjustment, it would be good to have a discussion with the Planning Commission. Therefore, it was placed on the agenda for discussion at today's meeting. So the one other thing to mention in terms of status, the applicant had submitted the concept plan to the state for a preliminary land use service report, a plus review. That was completed on September 22nd. We do not have the state review back yet. It's due back in a couple weeks. They will issue a report. Typically what happens with a report is when the state issues it, it goes to the applicant and the municipality. Applicants can respond to any points made in the letter, so there could be follow-up. But we will keep you posted on the status of when that process is officially completed. With that said, as I mentioned, there was a site plan review, but we will not go into details on that at this meeting. We're going to give just a conceptual evaluation review and wait for the site plan, for the other issues to be reconciled, for a new site plan to be submitted, and then go through a full city staff review. But just conceptually, and I'll reiterate some of the things that if anybody was at the Plus meeting, were from a concept plan review, looking at the proposed uses, which is a hotel, retail establishments, and accessory uses. Those uses in terms of zoning and in terms of the comprehensive development plan are consistent with the revitalization policies in the comprehensive development plan as an investment area. As I also mentioned at the meeting, there's also the balancing, which we talked about on other applications, that with the, while the use is consistent, the size or the massing or intensity is not consistent with our zoning, for one, which needs to be consistent with our comprehensive development plan. So there is a concern about the intensity and massing of the building since it exceeds the floor area ratio, the FAR. It's also, if you've looked at the plan yourself in terms of the concept plan, it's a larger mass than adjacent structures in many cases, although on the block there may be some uses that are as high, but relatively it's a larger structure than most other structures in that area. And it's important to reconcile all of these things from a comprehensive development plan in terms of it's a balancing act, as we were talking about. For revitalization, it's important to have that investment, but it's also to balance that with other things like the adjacent areas and residential areas, traffic and access. The one other thing to mention is, in terms of comprehensive development plan, is the concern about natural features. One of the issues that has been looked at in previous discussions on the concept plan is that the area is in floodplain. Although the floodplain has been revised from one zone to another, it does remain in a flood hazard zone, and there will be concerns, as was raised at the Plus meeting, about the impacts of that, especially with underground construction of a parking facility. So I would just mention that and say that in terms of the site plan review, that will be an issue that the city should expect to see a thorough review of the impacts of it in terms of when construction happens and when the site's cleared, but also development moving forward in terms of flood mitigation impact or flood hazards, that risks that may be there. So we can get into more detail as we move forward with a full site plan review, but those are the three big, I think, areas to look at from a conceptual plan, from a planner standpoint for the city.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Janis, are you online? You're muted, sir. Mr. Janis.
Hear me now.
Okay, yes, sir. Please proceed. Do you have anything to add to this concept review?
I do not. As Mr. West has stated, the application was initially for a site plan review and then got reduced down to a concept review. So as such, I do not have any comments at this time.
Okay, thank you. Is the representative of the applicant ready to come forward?
Yes, we are.
Okay, Mr. Dukes?
Okay, I'm here on behalf of the Papa John family. They're the owners of the corner of the boardwalk and Rehoboth Avenue on the south side. All of you have copies of surveys, plans, and pictures in front of you, I'm sure. The purpose of our discussion today is to make the board aware of what we can do with the property and what we'd like to do with the property. We have Mr. Follett will go over, he has created a presentation. It will go over all the details. We have a by right, which allows us to have a certain amount of bulk on the property. And the increases we are asking for are for the stores underneath the property so that we can put stores back on the boardwalk and on Rehoboth Avenue rather than just a parking lot there. And also to have a conference room and balconies, because we think that balconies are important to a upscale structure. In that regard, I'd like to have my partner here, Alexis Gaddy, discuss a bit about the comprehensive plan. You've got one that's coming, it's 13 or 3 years late now, but it'll get there. But we've tried to match it up to the old plan and also what we predict will be coming with a new plan. Alexis?
Hi, good afternoon to everyone. It's nice to meet you. I'm thrilled and honored to be part of the Belhaven team. And I don't need to tell you, I'm preaching to the choir, about the comprehensive development plan, but what I really think, when you drill everything down, when you look at the comprehensive development plan that we have now and the one that we're probably anticipating, key to that is development. Development is coming. There's no stopping it, which is why we need to plan accordingly. The size of this property, the bulk of just the property itself is unique. The structure that's been designed, the Belhaven Hotel, it has the charm that the comprehensive development plan is looking for. It has that sense of history that the CDP speaks to. But most important, it has that multi-use property that really is where we need to be going in the future. And it's unique because it is so large. We can keep so many structures on the boardwalk. These are the structures that families are used to seeing, that the residents want to maintain. The style of the hotel itself, those balconies, like Mr. Duke said, they're important to maintain that upscale feel. These are the families that we want to draw to our town within a town. We're a resort property, the entire city is. So going forward, to continue to infuse that charm is so important, which is why we're going to build the parking beneath the structure. So there is no eyesore. of cars right on the boardwalk. We're looking for the balconies to extend the value of those hotel rooms. The number of rooms, we're not even trying to maximize that. We've cut the number down. The multi-purpose room, the conference room, that's so important because it's going to allow the property to be continually used, even in the off season. So we're going to be bringing business in. So while we're asking for increases to the FAR, it's to maintain that retail. It's to really bring class and style to the hotel, the residential option. And it is to allow for the use of that multi-purpose room, the conference room, to allow these experiences. When you read the surveys from all of the residents, the visitors, the businesses, everybody's asking for off-season business. This answers that directly. And while the comprehensive development plan speaks to it, unfortunately, we have code right now that does not. But the answer is buried within the comprehensive development plan. It says use your variances to allow these multi-use properties to come to the area, to flourish within the area, so the resort feel stays right. We want the charm, we want the history. The design that we've submitted hits all of those high points. We need a variance for the FAR, and we don't think that we're asking too much. We think that we're actually asking for an appropriate use of variance, which we will be going before the board. And our intent today is to show you what the code would allow without any variance. Peter will walk you through. And you can really then see the difference between what the code allows versus what we're asking for, which is that infusion of charm that's in lockstep with the CDP. Hal, is there anything else you'd like to add?
We'd like to introduce Mr. Papajohn. So
I think we should introduce Mr. Papajohn. John, are you there? Because he can really speak to his involvement.
We can't get the video on it. We've been locked out by the host. Can you turn us on, please?
I have no control of your camera.
All right, let me try again. It says start video. You cannot start your video because the host has disabled it. Not sure. I don't use Ring Central all that much, but
We can hear you.
I had it on earlier. Okay, now it says the host has asked you to start your video. There we go. Great. You can see us, right? And hear us. Okay. Thank you. I'm Alex Papajohn. This is my father, John Papajohn. I think my dad wants to say a few words about the project and regale you with a little bit of our family history and also tell you what we'd like to accomplish.
Well, since this started, it's going into its third year. And so now we have a lot more different participants than we started with. So I'm going to have to bore the ones who heard part of this so that the new people can understand what our motivations are as a family. My dad went into partnership with my mother's two brothers. This is 1938. I was 5 years old. Now, the Belhaven was in its third bankruptcy. The Depression, right? You couldn't come down to Rehoboth directly from Milford. You had to drive all the way to Georgetown and come in. All obviously single lane roads. So they bought the premises in 1938. These are non-inflationary dollars, $33,000. Now, in today's money, it's got to be at least 20 times that. So it was still a buy, but it was in its third bankruptcy. So after the US started supporting Britain, times started to get a little better in 39 and 40. Then World War II came along, and I think that's what saved them. Because in 42, they purchased the Carlton Hotel, which is in the middle of the first block of Rehoboth Avenue. It's the brick-faced building you see. I think it's 4 stories high, maybe as high as 5, but 4 at least. And the rest of it is wood construction. So they bought that in 42. They split the property in 47. So the Tahoe's family, which is what my mother's family name was, wound up with the Carlton portion of the Belhaven property, we call it, which now has a t-shirt shop and Shell Brothers coffee shop. And then from the middle of the boardwalk where Dominic's Grotto Pizza has an alleyway there, all the way down to Wilmington Avenue, that became the Tahoe's properties. Later on, some people from Northern Virginia, I guess they had ties with some rats, bought the portion of Rehoboth Avenue that was part of the original Belhaven, where the Shell Brothers is now and the t-shirt shop. Well, I was raised in an apartment that is behind that tall building, which was rooms to the Belhaven Hotel. It was about 900 square feet. No doggone ability to keep the cold out, really, because it was, they built those houses back then, just a wood face, and that was it. My mother had these Greek blankets, which we called flocati brugs, white and crimson, and that's what we slept under in the wintertime. Had a coal oil stove, which is kerosene, and lived there till I got out of high school. So now, what am I driving at? There's a real strong sentimental feeling that runs through from my parents, through me, having worked in there, having an umbrella business on the beach, working all day, then working at night, washing dishes, second cook, waiter, bellhop, that were actually, they were almost like 12-hour days, 7 days a week. So why am I mentioning all this? It may get boring to some. But why I'm mentioning it is that the sentimental feeling I have for my parents and trying to transfer something down to my son and grandchildren is such that we want to put something there that obviously we would be proud of as a family, but also that benefits Rehoboth. I got involved with the Rehoboth Historical Society many years ago, contributed fairly heavily to it. I want to see things preserved, like Paul Flood, who family had the laundry right there by the canal bridge. It was a long, low building. He did all the laundry for the Rehoboth Hotel ourselves, what was called the Dinner Bell Inn. It's now the Broadmoor. They're on Christian Street. And what I'm trying to emphasize is the strong feeling that I have for Rehoboth. I will not step back from anybody's feelings for Rehoboth any more than what I have. Now, why am I emphasizing this? Well, because your job, obviously, is to try and do what is best for Rehoboth now and in the future, even long-term future. That's the problem you have. I've heard for years, at least 40 years, when I used to go to meetings there at the City Hall. Can you believe that Rehoboth, when I came down here, had a 1-lane around Rehoboth Avenue? Most of the other streets were sandy dirt. Cars would drive up and down them. And back then, not many people had much money. The ladies would do their laundry in the washing machine and hang them out in the yards. Cars would go down the street, the dust would blow all over everything. So there was a proposal that the streets be macadamized. Now, none of us would say, well, that makes sense. Guess what? We had what I refer to as the NIMBY types. You get a lot of complaints to the city about all the dust getting on their laundry and had to do something. So they send water trucks down there to drop water with a pipe out the back end of the truck to wet the streets. Well, after about an hour, they would dry up. So they were back to dusty. So finally, they started saying, well, we want to macadamize the streets. What happened? You couldn't believe the number of people came out and said, we don't want to change the character of Rehoboth we wanted to stay with the sandy streets because that's what we like. That's why we come down here. And this is the kind of thing you're going to run into. And I have for many, many years, since the late 40s and 50s, where you get a certain number of people that say they don't like this. And when you start asking them why, it's generalized. It's too whatever. The last comments I heard about our project is it's too big. Well, the 4-story building you see of the hotel, it's actually 5 stories because it was raised on the first level. I remember carrying mattresses up in there to change it between rooms to make them more rentable. Up and down those steps, no elevators. What is the situation with respect to that is that is only on what I call the Belhaven side of the property. 22,000 feet. That does not include the Normandy Apartments, which is the Wilmington Avenue part. That's 16,500 feet. 165 on Wilmington by 100 deep. Along the avenue is 220 feet by 100 deep. That's why they're joined up. But back when I grew up, those were all individual homes there on Wilmington Avenue. Those weren't apartments. They were built by Mrs. Lewis, and Hal knows this because he worked for her. It was called the Royalton Hotel. Before that, it was Thawley's Hotel. In fact, there were so many people that lived in town. There were 5 of us that lived on Wilmington Avenue and First Street. Tommy Thawley, that was Thawley's Hotel before it became the Wilmington. He went to the Naval Academy. Darrell Stevenson, Dale Wilhelm, Dick Messick, Bill Hill, myself, we were all residents of Wilmington Avenue and First Street. In fact, you had a lot of people who lived in town. There were carpenters, sons, plumbers, you name it. Now, originally there wasn't much money around. Everybody had to work like a sled dog to make it. 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Carpenters were paid in the late 30s $1 a day, and they were glad to get it. So we didn't start out with this big property. After all, I'm now 88 years old as of June. So all this comes back to me, and I think I want to do something not just for the family and its heritage, but something that Rehoboth can be proud of. Because I think that it is important that something go in that sort of sets somewhat of a precedent. It doesn't change the whole town. It just sets something up that says, this is what you can do if the city wants to improve things, really improve things. So what are we doing? We're proposing something that I'm going to have to spend at least out of the coffers and borrow. And, well, when it started out, it was going to be somewhere between $12 to $15 million for the underground parking. Now it's been delayed for a year. It's not all the city's fault because of FEMA. And they're ridiculous. I'm sorry to call it that. Someday somebody's going to have to describe to me how they came up with all these different designations. Because when I was a little kid, you could walk underneath the boardwalk and not touch it. In fact, adults had problems touching the joist that held the boardwalk up. You walked underneath the boardwalk from the avenues out onto the beach. If you go down in the northeast storm and watch where the present jetties are, it'll wash out enough sand that the old jetties are still buried under there, but they were shorter. The newer jetties have extended the beach. But even back then, we knew what sea level was. Right now, since 1964, we have had a basement that runs all along the avenue under those stores. We put, as a precaution, 2 sump pumps in it. Never since then has it flooded in the basement from those wells. You'll see the water rise 3 or 4 inches, then go down 3 or 4 inches. It got flooded twice. When? In the 70s and 80s, I forget the years. Why? Because the city had neglected to clean out the drains that led out to the ocean across the beach. They backed up the water, and that's what got into the basement. It never came in from the ocean. Never. Now, during the storm of 63, it was a northeaster. We've been through lots of hurricanes, which were much more violent. But this was a weird storm that only got up to 45, 50 mile an hour winds, but it stayed there like a washing machine and ate away the foundation slowly. It never let the ocean back up to a low tide. So every succeeding tide for 3 days sort of marched up the beach slowly. And that's how you wound up with the damage to the boardwalk and all of the stores caving in, because very few of them had pilings. The Hamilton Hotel, ours, the Atlantic Sands, lost its swimming pool and everything. So what am I driving at? There's a bifurcated incentive on our family. Talked about this with Alex and my other son, Nick. We want to set something up for our family, but it first and foremost is an investment. Okay, we can invest in a lot of different places. Having been involved in the stock market since '65, it's the advantage of the stock market. You can get in and out every day, even though you don't like the price. You can get in and out. With real estate, you're done. You are committed. So why do we want to spend this extra money so that we can have our heritage as a family? But just as importantly, it's something that we can do that hopefully provides an incentive for Rehoboth Avenue and Wilmington Avenue to do something meaningful, to change the code and its interpretation so we don't have to go through so many variances. The problem is, under the last 40 years, we had people who said, we're going to pass something that satisfies the problems with the residential area, whether it had to do with swimming pools or parking or restrictions on side deep lines. And what happened was, I think inadvertently, they passed these rules and regs and they applied them to the commercial area just as much as they did to the residential. Now we're in C1. We're not adjacent to any residential area. None of our lot lines impinge on any residential area whatsoever. So, okay, maybe I'm going on too long here, but I want to impress upon you the fact that times have changed from the standpoint of finances as well. Nobody knew this was going to happen. Nobody anticipated it. But the federal government, because of COVID and other reasons, has been throwing money like confetti in a Fifth Avenue parade, cascading down from the buildings. Now, the situation is such that we are getting people coming in from that put things up in Myrtle Beach, Virginia Beach, all up and down those. These people are sort of like specializing in seacoast properties. They're tugging on our sleeves. They're saying, hey, look, we want to buy your place. Forget about 12 or 15 or 16 million or 20 million to put in underground parking. We're just going to come in and put in a condominium. It will comply with all the code. They've done their research. With all the code restrictions, fine. And one of the things that tears me up about that, frankly, is if I did agree to that, I'd have to go to all the tenants that I've had relationships with for years who've become good friends. I mean, Dominic has been there since the mid-'60s. You know, Grotto Pizza, the jewelry store, even the spice and tea shop. So this motel that we're proposing is going to be acclimated and aimed at middle income to upper middle income people. These are the people that are going to be spending, hopefully, $600 to $700 a night for a room during the heavy season. These are the kind of people you want to go around that'll support Carlton's Men's Shop. There used to be the Grecian gift shop across the street that had really nice items. We used to buy Christmas gifts in the middle of Rehoboth Avenue, next to the Blue Hand Theater, at the Horn Zone, the Horn property. The only real residential areas you had was in the third block. You still see those homes. Gene Hudson used to live in a home there where his dad was head of the public health department for the whole state of Delaware and Dover. So some of these homes are still there. But what is really pathetic is that after all these years, and it's not your fault, you've just come on the scene, most of you. These are people who said, we got to change it, we got to change it, we got to change it. The time has come that we can't wait much longer, because in investments, you got to take the opportunity in order to take advantage of the financial wherewithal that's available. These people have so much money, these money market guys out of New York, that they have to put it to work. They can't find enough places to put it to work, so they're willing to pay more. And that's the problem I have. What is best for our family? Now, the time for waiting has come to a close. We have to make up our mind. We are either going to sell out to these people and they're going to put in a condominium with on-street parking, which I hate. I think it's an awful thing for Rehoboth. But if you want to talk about finances, a minimum of investment and a maximization of return is what you should look at. So we have to toss out the sentimental part and say, look, it's not going to happen. We've been told that we're going to do this, and we're going to do this, we're going to do this for 40 years. Now, I know your intentions are good, but all we hear is, well, wait a while. We're going to change it. No, wait a while. The time for waiting is over. Thank you. Any questions? We're glad to try and answer them. By the way, Zip Rice had a dealership there. We were just talking about that State Road project. There was a car dealership there. The Zip Rice dad bought his DeSotos there. I used to take my Jeep up there and get it repaired. He had good mechanics when I had the umbrella business on the beach. So that's when it was a country club. That's why they call it Country Club Estates. There were no homes there. It was a country club. I used to caddy that thing, making 50 cents for 9 holes. That was big money for a little boy. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, Mr. Dukes, I just wanted to remind you that this Planning Commission meeting will end at 4:30. So you may want to map out what the rest of your presentation is, or perhaps defer to a subsequent meeting. The code provides for that. And so I just want to make you aware that the staff needs to head out at 4:30.
Mr. Dukes was talking, but he was muted, I think.
Okay. Mr. Dukes?
Can you hear me? I think Peter wants to begin his presentation, our architect.
Right. Put Peter on and let him run it.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Dukes, you did hear my comments, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah, okay, so real quick, thank you for the opportunity to I'll just go through this very quickly because we have actually, first of all, can you see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Okay. We've, as you are aware, or at least some of the members of the commission are aware, we've been working on this for quite some time. We've had a couple of work sessions, and what I'm going to do is just skip to the basics here and show you the latest changes that we did to the project, which I think were comments that we got from one of the work groups, and explain a couple updates. One is that officially we did get this site over here on Baltimore Avenue that we intend to use for parking, off-site parking that'll help meet the parking requirements of the project, okay? Second thing is in your package, you'll see that we did do sort of a zoning analysis. And in our zoning analysis, we have simplified our variance request to being only for the FAR. In other words, the building height complies, the cupola complies, the antenna complies, the lot coverage complies, the minimum lot area per dwelling unit complies, the minimum building setbacks comply, the rear yard setback, the side yard setback, the loading, and
and setback and the parking. The entire project applies with the zoning in terms of height, use, bulk, okay? And so the only thing that we are trying to ask for in terms of a zoning variance is to allow for this project to be mixed use, okay? And the mixed use would allow us to build retail on the ground level and hotel uses on the second, third, fourth levels, and also have a convention, a small conference center meeting room, which will allow for year-round business, hopefully overflowing into other businesses in the community. So in particular, I'm going to skip through the parking plans. This is the underground parking garage. We did get approval from FEMA to allow us to build it by changing the zone from a zone that would not allow for residential uses above an underground parking garage to a zone that allows for that to happen. The reason is that they did build over the past 50 years in Rehoboth. Congratulations, you did build a dune that will protect the city, and that dune elevation is 13, which is adequate to stop the wave requirements that FEMA agreed with, okay? The most important part of this change that we want to update you is that the plan does show now that retail happens along Rehoboth Avenue, along the boardwalk, and then the site, as you may recall, is this sort of S shape or zigzag shape that opens also on Wilmington Avenue. And previously along Wilmington Avenue, we showed the porte cochere and parking, undercover parking all along Wilmington Avenue. And what we've done now is we've pulled the lobby of the hotel out to the street. We've put the lobby bar cafe out on the street, and then we've created another small retail space along Wilmington Avenue. And so the majority, 2/3 or 3/4 of the street along Wilmington Avenue will be activated pedestrian-friendly uses. The loading is also there, and the access to the underground parking. So we've made these as small as possible, and we've maximized this. And this is from the last work session that we had. So that's how we got to where we are. And that's sort of the most important change. I'll go quickly through the plans. The hotel basically sets back as required along Rehoboth and the boardwalk. And the setback, which is actually the roof of the retail, we use partially as canopy roof and partially as terraces, okay? The other part of the setback is we've created a pool terrace along Wilmington Avenue. Why along Wilmington and not along the beach is because Wilmington has the south-facing sun. It's the best sun. We put the meeting room over here, and sort of, so in the off-season, the terrace for the meeting room and the pool terrace can all function as one terrific outdoor breakout space for weddings and meetings year-round. Upper levels are just units, rooms, and we've provided ample outdoor spaces, balconies for the rooms to help elevate the brand and the visitor experience. We could do without them, but obviously, as we all know, staying on the water is great to have a balcony to get the sea breezes and the sunlight. The roof is very exciting. We're doing a living roof. One of the comments, unfortunately, when the commission, the Bay Commission, DENREC Commission reviewed the project, they only reviewed the site plan. They didn't get a chance to see the entire project. One of their recommendations is to consider the use of solar panels and living roofs. So unfortunately, I wasn't on that meeting. I didn't get a chance to go to it, but you can see this greenish color here is all living roof, okay? The other dark green is the roof that's meant to sort of be a historical reminder of the green roofs of the historic Belhaven. These bands, all you see through here, those are all solar panels. So the building will have substantial solar panel, and we are trying to get it to be a net zero project. We'll see if we're able to do.
which means that the building itself will will use no more energy than the site itself generates. Okay, so we're trying to create a development that not only is handsome and a fantastic tourist amenity, but also good for the planet, a sustainable project. I'm going to skip through these. These are just the elevations, and well, I will show you that this is the elevation facing Wilmington Avenue down here. You can see that it's mostly glass and storefront. These are our adjacent properties. Here you can see them in white. This is the building behind. This is the view, the elevation along the boardwalk, and you can see we are including Candy Kitchen and Grotto Pizza. And along this elevation down here, you can see that the existing tenants are intended to come back. And then these are just part of the details of the signage section. So here are some views very quickly coming along Rehoboth Avenue. Down the street. You know, we really are looking for a resort style that's reminiscent of the historic hotel. Dr. Trejos sent you a bunch of really awesome images of what the building used to look like. This is sort of our 2021 version of that, all right? So we're just gonna go quickly through this. View of Rehoboth, the corner, waterfront. So one of the things that we want to show you, and we did at the last meeting, show a video or some images like this of a single-use hotel. And Mr. Papajohn asked me if we would be able to show you what that would look like in 3 dimensions. So this video here shows you a single-use hotel, okay? Which basically means that it corresponds to height and bulk and setback. It's a 4-story, 42-foot tall building, but it is one use. All the 2.0 permitted FAR is for a hotel, all right? So in this plan, you're gonna see a nightmare scenario that would show parking on the ground level and 3 levels of hotel on top. The parking underneath of the hotel is included in the FAR. That's the way it works in the code. Again, this is a by right scenario. We do not need to ask any permission to do this plan, right? This is not what we want to build, but as Mr. Papajohn said earlier, this is what the pressure is to sell the property to such a purchaser, right? So, and there is room for a hotel pool, and there still is 110 rooms on this plan, okay? So there's 110 parking spaces and 110 rooms. There would be very few, if any, amenities in the hotel, but there would be a lobby, a small, a typical select service hotel, or this could become a condominium project where the units would be slightly different. The unit count could be slightly different. So let's just get to the point, and the point is that we all agree that this is not what the zoning code and the CDP envisions for these prime corners, and the CDP does actually promote the idea of a mixed-use project. The CDP, as you know, was written in 2009. So we feel like our hardship is that no action has been taken on the CDP for the past 13 years. And so we really feel like the time has come to build this. Mr. Papajohn is 87 when he hired me. Okay, so time is of the essence to move the mixed use opportunity forward on this site. And what's really dreadful about this image that you're looking here is walking down Rehoboth Avenue and looking to the right and seeing parking. Right? This is what the zoning code permits as it's written today, right? So this is zoning that was written for 1960, not for 2021. So, and I'm a Delaware boy. I've been going to this
since I was a little kid. This is the last thing that should be allowed to be built here, okay? And the zoning code suggests, or the CDP suggests, that's what should not happen. Okay, so enough of that. We'll go into the good one, hopefully. Okay, here we go. No, it's coming back. Oh yeah, no, it's right. So this is what we're proposing. We think it's a world-class design for a world-class location, and we're very excited to be a part of the team to realize this. And we are hoping that the Planning Commission will write a letter supporting our project to allow us to encourage and obtain the zoning variance that allows us to go from an FAR2 to an FAR3 for this particular site. This is a 4-story building. It has balconies. It has architectural character. It has retail on the ground level. And it is certainly the kind of development that the CDP. I'm going to cut this short unless you want to watch the whole thing.
No, cut it short.
Okay.
Mr. Falat?
Yes, sir.
Were the slides that you put up from the update site plan review that you submitted dated 9/24/21?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're looking at the same document that has been filed with the Planning Commission.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, sir.
Okay, thank you.
That concludes our presentation, I believe, Commissioner.
Thank you, sir. Members of the commission, we have about 15 minutes left. Is there any discussion at this point among the commissioners as to where we are on this concept review? Now, mind you, we still have to reach out to the public to see if there are any comments, hopefully brief ones, but any other discussion among the commissioners at this moment? Mr. Strange.
Yes, I'd like to at least identify a few misconceptions or misconcepts with the statements that were made. And I appreciate Mr. Papajohn's review of history. I only have 40 years worth of history with Rehoboth Beach, so I can't come close to him. But I think it's important to point out a couple things, and that were misstated by Mr. Falat in his presentation and a couple of other observations, is that in the plan that was submitted a couple of years ago that we reviewed, and I think I was the only member then at that point that's now on the commission, is the fact that we recommended, and the result of the change in the underground parking not being counted in the FAR was really motivated by the proposal that Mr. Papajohn came up with, because we didn't want to have the plan, which what I would call is the Motel 6 plan, as opposed to the Walt Disney plan. And that was the two plans that were presented 2 years ago. The other part is, and although there may be economic pressures to develop in this way, that it's absolutely a misstatement that by right, as Hal will agree, you have the right to develop your property. But in this case, it's a redevelopment and of such a scale that it's going to come to the Planning Commission anyway. And so you can't just naturally do whatever the heck you feel like. Along those lines, I would agree with the proposal in terms of the second plan that the Papajohns have presented, which is the one that is the recommended one. However, the scale of it is completely inappropriate, and the request for the change in FAR is way over the line. 76% greater than what our FAR permits. And yet that FAR was the result of what the Papajohns did, which is very positive, in that it was helped motivated the ability to get underground parking and have it not be part of the FAR. So the concept of economic pressure from the outside, it may very well be there, but the aspect of it here that I think is exceedingly important is what Rehoboth Beach has decided what it wants to be in the future, which is reflected in the comprehensive development plan, and as a result of decisions that were made some 40 years ago to change the height restrictions in Rehoboth Beach for the commercial zone, because Rehoboth did not want to be like Ocean City or Atlantic City for that matter. And so those decisions determined what the height restrictions were, and from that flowed the FAR restrictions, et cetera, which were the benefit of the entire community, because we didn't want to be like those, quote, other communities. We wanted to have our stock in trade and the economic value of Rehoboth because of the character of Rehoboth, of all the things that Mr. Papajohn pointed out that were of historically significant to the nature of Rehoboth Beach. And I would point to cities such as Nantucket, Carmel by the Sea, where made similar decisions and they did not elect to go what I would call high rise. So that's where we're at right now. And the plan as submitted does in fact have some serious issues because the FAR requests are so large and I think are completely inappropriate. And the part that bothers me most with this is that you could in fact produce the design that they wish with the mixed use, with the retail at ground level, with underground parking, and achieve all of the characteristics that they're looking for without having the mass that they're looking for, which has a very negative impact on the entire community. And so I think that's sort of where we're at. And I guess that would be my main observation.
Thank you, sir.
You'd have to switch down the room.
Commissioners, anyone else? Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Davis.
If I'm not mistaken, your property, Mr. Papajohn, is in, it's actually a variety, a number of separate properties for purposes of the tax map, ownership, and so forth. I assume at some point in time you're going to have to assemble all of those pieces, which I gather are owned by different family members, trusts, whatever.
It's been done already,
It's been done, it's all been assembled,
all under one ownership.
all under one ownership.
Still has to be subdivided.
Pardon me?
I indicated, like you, that it would have to be subdivided, into one lot or to build it.
Well, but I understand Mr. Papajohn to say that's already been done.
He means it's all in one ownership. I think he means it's all in one ownership. I don't think he means it's all been under one lot. I could be wrong.
Mr. Dukes, could you comment to that,
All
please?
lots have been combined under the same corporation, which I have two trusts that own an equal portion of that corporation. So it is under one. I don't know what you're looking at, but Hal Dukes' office did that, I don't know, a month or almost 2 months ago now. That is all under one ownership corporation. The Normandy Apartments and what we call the Belhaven property, they're all under one corporate ownership. Because that was at the request that the city made. They said it'd be easier for us to have you combine this all together. And we did that for that reason. Or basically, we did it for that reason.
Okay, Mr. Kaufman?
Oh, a couple of things. I understand, as Mr. Papajohn has said, it's all under one ownership. What I believe Commissioner Davis was referring to, and I think what I'm referring to, is there's a process to combine the lots so that there is one lot and that building doesn't cross lot lines. That would have to be done as they move forward, if they move forward. So it's just Mr. Papajohn is talking about the combination of the ownership, but Ms. Davis and I are talking about the subdivision of the property that has to occur so it can get a building permit if and when it goes forward. I had another question, which I wanted to ask the architect is, do you intend to seek a LEED certification for this as a green building?
Mr. Falat?
We haven't quite decided that. We will. If it's at the behest of the commission, we'd be happy to do so. But at this point, we have not made that decision. I mean, we'll easily be able to qualify. It's just a matter of us, doing the paperwork. It's not required by code. I would recommend that you make it a requirement by code when you redo your CDP. But, so I don't want to speak for the ownership. I would recommend that we do. It's better for the resale, or if there is resale. This is better for the market altogether. And it would, at this point, with the way we're thinking about this, it would easily qualify as LEED Gold.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with that. I have some comments to make, but I want to let the other commissioners speak, and then I'd like to make a few comments myself.
Anyone else? Okay, Mr. Kaufman, please remember too that this matter the plans that we see today could dramatically change before they come back to us again. So I don't think we're looking at a finished product. We don't even know what the Board of Adjustment's going to do here. So I'm not sure how far you can.
With your
I'm not sure.
permission, then I will make my comments. First of all, I like this plan very much. I think they've done an excellent job. If you're going to have intense development anywhere in the city in the commercial area, it should be right here. So I don't have the problem that Commissioner Strange has with the intensity of this building. They've kept it to the 4 stories. They've done a beautiful job, in my opinion, aesthetically. I very much do not like having to seek waivers from the Board of Adjustments. We should have a zoning ordinance that permits waivers with visual subdivision and site plan reviews as part of the zone. The waivers from the Board of Adjustments, most variances really in the country they're only allowed for extreme hardship.
Right.
We have this situation in Rehoboth where, for example, I think the Fifth Avenue Hotel had to seek all those variances, and the previous planning commission wrote a letter for them. I guess we'd have to do that here now, but I think they've done an excellent job. The fact that the ordinance was changed to allow underground parking is a significantly important change in our ordinances. The FAR limitations in the city right now, quite candidly, I don't think there's almost any project commercially that could meet the current FAR standards and have any kind of architectural beauty to it. And those need to be changed. We're going to have a hearing on the 15th on the current ordinance. I intend to speak to that. I have indicated that I'd like to get on the list of public speakers. But I mean, in terms of what Papa John's has done here, I think is really, really a good job. And I want to commend Senior Papa John's for his devotion to the city, and also for his long history and letting us know about that. I may have a few other comments when we get further along, but I, for one, think they've done a terrific job here. Thank you.
Okay, members of the commission, we're
Hi.
coming. Yes, Rachel.
Hi, I know we're just down to a few minutes and I wasn't going to say anything, but I am absolutely in agreement with Commissioner Kaufman. He and I have been through another review of this, which was the Motel 6 that came before us, because that would meet code. And we all agreed that that was not what we wanted to see in Rehoboth, especially in that iconic location. So I think the work that's been done, unfortunately, it's taken a lot of time, but there have been concessions. There's been additional money spent to look at this, I guess it's really a FEMA type application, and work through the process there as it relates to the possibility of having underground parking, which I think demonstrates that Papa John and the family there have actually listened to the Planning Commission's ideas and thoughts, and have come back with, I think it's an amazing property structure and concept that they've brought to us. So I do think we should recommend that they move forward with this, and I would like to see us write a letter to the Board of Adjustments.
Ms. Hunter, we'll have one more comment, and then I'm going to ask the applicant whether they would like to defer this for the next regular meeting. We have people who have signed up to speak from the public who have not yet been heard. And so we're bumping up against our 4:30 deadline. So I'd like to go ahead, Ms. Hunter, if you would, and then ask the applicant how they'd like to proceed.
You're muted.
Nan, you're going to have to unmute. Yeah.
Thank you very much. The only thing I want to say is to reiterate the point. I don't have any comment at this point on the plans or the quality of the plans, positive or negative. My point is simply to reiterate and to stress that, in my view, it would be wrong to repeat the statement that Commissioner Strange identified as incorrect, which I agree is incorrect. And that is that if an alternative along the lines of what we may call Motel 6 were to be pursued, that it would not have to come back before the Planning Commission. I want it to be crystal clear that it would have to come back before the Planning Commission. And I think that's important for the developers to know, it's important for the public to know, and it's important for the Board of Adjustment to know. And so I want that to be, that's extremely important to me. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dukes?
Thank you. I wish we'd had more time. The issue is that we do have, we're seeking your recommendation or a letter in support of this project. There's a lot of contradictions in the code. And the truth of the matter is, to have an upscale project, commercial project in Rehoboth is virtually impossible. Not just us, but Dolly's Popcorn, the other people that own Baltimore Avenue are all trapped by these ordinances that don't recognize the need for upscale quality commercial projects in the Rehoboth area. And if you don't have upscale projects, you're not going to have upscale folks, and things go sideways. So what we're looking for is your support. We have a hearing coming up. I don't know whether it's physically possible for you to put a recommendation together. I don't know, but we are asking for your support.
Okay, sir, but in terms of proceeding, do you want to come back before the Planning Commission, or are you wrapping up your presentation today? As I say, we still have not been able to reach out to several people that have signed up, I believe. I don't know which ones of them are still with us. Perhaps Dr. Trejos is. I don't see anybody else. Oh, Rick Perry is. So we're having difficulty here because of our time. And so if we can defer this, and that's not an issue, we can defer this, have the public make their comments, and then make a decision as a commission as to what the commission wants to do. But I don't think we're in a position today to ask the Planning Commission to make a recommendation when they have not heard from the rest of the folks who have signed up to speak, and when we're under this type of deadline.
I understand that. I think Mr. Papajohn had something he wanted to say, but I guess this decision is his.
Mr.
All
Papajohn?
I'm just saying again is I see no reason to extend this longer and longer and longer. There's always good reasons from a lot of people's standpoint to delay things. The time has come when people tug on your sleeve, that the old expression in the stock market, when people are real greedy and things are going wonderful, that's the time to sell. When it's time, when everybody is running for the hills and they're scared, that's the time to be buying. This is not going to last forever. Maybe the next 6 months, who knows what's going to happen. But these people are going to fade into the woodwork. They're going to say the money has been spent. We don't have any more. We've got it now. We've got to put it to use. The people coming to me, they don't care. 4% and 8% commission, they're gone. The ones who buy it, they're going to put something up in 2 or 3 years. So I ask you, all of you, forget the sentimentality, forget the personal side of it. what is best for Rehoboth? To do this or to wind up with what I call either a schlock motel or condominiums? Because now the economic side is becoming more prevalent as these people keep coming down and saying, here's several million more. And when you say no, here's several million more. After a while you say, am I stupid? Everybody I've talked to that I knew was developing around DC area. Take the money. So that's the temptation.
Do I hear a motion to defer this matter for further consideration by the Planning Commission?
So moved.
I'll move that.
Okay, I have a motion and second. Is there any discussion? We can't really conclude this hearing at this time is the problem. So,
I understand that.
so is there any, we have a motion and a second. Discussion is, I believe, is concluded. All those in favor of deferring, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the chair votes aye, and the matter is deferred to the next meeting.
Can I make just a quick comment?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Dukes, I don't know when your hearing is for the Board of Adjustments, but even if you have a hearing before we can reconsider this and come to a conclusion, you can always ask for a record to remain open in order to receive something from the Planning Commission. I definitely don't think we are in a position today to make a decision on this.
I understand.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, there were several other items, none of which are substantive. And one is we will have, hopefully have an election of officers on November 12th. And there will be a request for the Rehoboth Beach the commissioners, the Board of Commissioners, unless I hear an objection today, we will request that the Board of Commissioners amend the code in order to set a deadline by which written submissions must be made to the Planning Commission. We've had submissions made the day before, 2 days before, and it's creating a logistics issue with the city staff and with the commission itself. So we need to, as for example, in site plans have a 28-day, I believe, deadline. Is that correct? So right now, it's just sort of, it's not running as a smooth process, and we need to bring some order to that process by setting a deadline by which written submissions must be made in order to be considered by the Planning Commission. So do I have anyone objecting to that request to the Board of Commissioners? Mr. Mendelis would have to draft it. Okay, we'll move forward with that. I believe if I have a motion to adjourn, I would entertain that.
I moved.
Ms. Macha, Ms. Davis, thank you. Have a good weekend, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.